Donovan Price fired me in front of 7 global pharmaceutical giants, with $5 billion hanging in the balance. He thought he was ending my career. He didn't realize he had just started a 10-minute countdown to the complete annihilation of his own. The system I had built to protect our science from his ego was about to respond to its final input, his arrogance. My name is Dr. Emerald Watts, and at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday morning in the Helix conference room, my 20-year legacy at Kalin Biogenetics was supposed to be publicly executed. The glass walls of the conference room overlooked the Pacific Ocean, a serene blue canvas that starkly contrasted the tension inside. 7 faces, representing the future of medicine from Zurich to Tokyo, watched from their minimalist chairs. $5 billion in funding lay on the table, not as paper contracts, but as a digital covenant ready to be signed. This was the final presentation for Project Chimera, a revolutionary gene therapy platform that promised to cure diseases once thought to be life sentences. My life's work. I stood at the holographic display, my fingers hovering over the data stream for the synaptic lock protocol. My protocol. The molecular architecture I had designed over a decade, a complex, elegant process that ensured our therapy would safely adapt to each patient's unique genetic code. It was the very soul of Chimera, the one piece of the puzzle that made it all work. Donovan's voice, smooth and practiced like a salesman's pitch, cut through the room. Before we proceed to the final authorization, there's a small matter of internal restructuring to address. The air in the room grew cold. I watched his face shift into the mask of thoughtful leadership he wore when announcing layoffs while cashing a 7-figure bonus. Dr. Watts, he said, deliberately using my title in a way that felt like a dismissal, your contributions have been foundational. But as we move from research to commercialization, your role here is no longer required. The words hung in the air, sharp and sterile. 7 sets of eyes darted between Donovan and me, calculating the risk of this sudden, bizarre power play. Dr. Alastair Finch from London's consortium, a man who understood the science as well as I did, placed his stylus down with a quiet, deliberate click. Effective immediately, Donovan continued, his voice dripping with the casual cruelty of a man who has never built anything more complex than a stock portfolio. Your access has been revoked. Your data has been transferred. Your position has been eliminated. My father's voice, from a childhood spent in his engineering workshop, echoed in my mind. When a structure is under stress, Emerald, never reveal the fracture points. I didn't gasp. I didn't argue. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I calmly closed my laptop. Then I reached for the small, crimson-red data key plugged into its side. The crimson key. I pulled it out, its metallic surface cool against my skin, and looped its chain around my neck. It settled against my chest, a silent declaration. Donovan thought he was conducting a hostile takeover of my life's work. He didn't know that I had already written the code for his demolition months ago. He had just voluntarily pressed the execute button. Security appeared at the door. 2 men I'd shared coffee with for years, now looking at me with a mixture of pity and shame. As I walked towards them, my heels clicking softly on the polished concrete floor, I passed close enough to Dr. Finch to see the question in his eyes. Close enough to see him recognize the crimson key. In the world of high-stakes biotech, a personal, physical data key-like that meant one thing, a proprietary protocol so vital that its creator was hardwired into the system itself. 10 minutes. That's all it would take for the empire Donovan thought he controlled to recognize that its architect was gone. The elevator doors closed on my career, but I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was leaving with the knowledge that Donovan Price had just lit the fuse to his own kingdom, utterly oblivious to the existence of the bomb. The elevator descended through 20 floors, each one a monument to a year of my life. 20 years, 168,000 hours, if you counted the nights and weekends spent coaxing life-changing data from stubborn cell cultures. I remembered my first day, a wide-eyed PhD graduate convinced I could change the world one base pair at a time. The building had felt like a cathedral of possibility. Now, as security walked me through the lobby I'd crossed thousands of times, it felt like a tomb. The memories came unbidden. My daughter's first science fair, missed because Donovan needed me to fix a catastrophic data corruption he'd caused. The call from the hospice telling me my father had hours left. I couldn't go. We were 24 hours from a critical milestone, and Donovan had, through his own negligence, nearly invalidated 3 years of research. My father died while I was saving Donovan's reputation. Or the ceremony 3 years ago where he accepted the Innovator of the Year award for the synaptic lock protocol. My protocol. He stood on stage, thanking his team for their support, while I watched from the back of the room, too exhausted from a 72-hour work week to feel anything but a cold, quiet rage. He never said my name. The patent had his name first. Mine was listed in a long line of contributors buried in the appendix. As we reached the glass doors of the main entrance, one of the guards, Mike, finally spoke, his voice low. "This is wrong, Dr. Watts. Everyone knows it." Everyone knowing and someone doing something are two different species, Mike, I said, my own voice steady, a perfect mask for the storm building inside me. The bright San Diego sun hit me as I stepped outside. The world kept moving, indifferent. I sat in my car in the parking garage, engine off, listening to the hum of a building that was continuing on without me. My phone buzzed with texts from shocked colleagues and concerned friends. I ignored them. Instead, I opened my personal, encrypted laptop. The one Donovan never knew existed. On the screen, I pulled up the architecture of the Chimera project's compliance system. It was more than just data. It was a living digital ecosystem I had designed, with every risk assessed, every protocol cross-referenced, every safety measure interlinked. But the real masterpiece was hidden not in what it did, but in how it was built. It was an ethical compliance dead man's switch. After the Icarus project, when Donovan's corner cutting almost led to a public health disaster that I had to secretly fix, I started building my insurance policy. I embedded a failsafe into the FDA compliance monitoring system. It was a simple, elegant piece of code that required a bi-weekly cryptographic authentication. A digital signature confirming that the key scientific personnel responsible for the project's core integrity was still actively overseeing the data. That signature could only be generated by one thing, my Crimson key. When Donovan revoked my access, the system registered it as a critical failure. The countdown had begun. He thought scientific compliance was just paperwork. He never understood that in the world of gene therapy, it was the load-bearing wall that kept the entire structure from collapsing into a multi-billion-dollar pile of lawsuits and human tragedy. My phone rang. My daughter, Chloe, now a medical student at Stanford. "Mom, Jennifer from your office just called me. She said you were fired. In front of everyone. I'm fine, sweetheart. You're not fine. You never say you're fine unless you're not fine. 20 years, Mom. You gave them 20 years. I smiled, a genuine smile for the first time that day, hearing the anger in her voice. Sometimes, the end of one story is just the beginning of another. That's cryptic, even for you. Through the opening of the parking garage, I could see the Kalin Biogenetics Tower gleaming against the sky. Up on the 20th floor, Donovan was likely taking credit for my final presentation, assuring 7 investors that his new, streamlined approach would be far more efficient. He had no idea that for 2 decades, I had been the only thing standing between him and catastrophe. No idea that every lead scientist in that room had my personal number because they knew when real problems arose, Donovan was useless. No idea that his entire empire was built on a scientific foundation that only I knew how to maintain. In approximately 3 minutes, he would begin to understand. The memory of the Icarus project haunted me. 3 years ago, at 11 p.m. on a Saturday. Donovan was in Davos, hobnobbing with investors, while I was reviewing the final datasets before a clinical trial. Buried deep in a subprocess he had ordered fast-tracked, I found a fatal flaw. A single miscalculation in a protein folding sequence. It was a tiny error that would have caused catastrophic immune responses in trial subjects. I caught it, spent 48 sleepless hours rebuilding the sequence, and never told anyone except Leo and IT, who, at my request, kept a time-stamped record of the original, flawed data in a secure, isolated server. Donovan signed off on my corrected data the following Monday, fresh off his private jet, taking credit for a flawless execution at the next board meeting. It was a pattern. The EPA violation in our Oregon facility, where Donovan ordered the disposal of biohazardous materials through a standard waste contractor to cut costs. I had to create a backdated paper trail implicating a manager who had already resigned, while I secretly paid a specialized firm out of a contingency budget to handle it correctly. The federal investigators never knew how close we'd come to criminal charges. 20 years of being his invisible shield. 20 years of letting him be the face while I was the brain and the conscience. The board saw him as a visionary CEO. In reality, he was a hollow suit, propped up by my science and saved by my silence. The irony was not lost on me. I had built every safeguard, every redundant protocol, every compliance check in Kalen's system to be interdependent, a complex web designed to catch errors. But after the Icarus incident, I built something else into the web. Something I never told anyone about, a kill switch. It wasn't sabotage. It was an ethical failsafe. I began embedding tiny, interconnected triggers into our core compliance architecture. Alone, they were dormant, but activated in the right sequence, they were a controlled demolition system for the fraudulent reality Donovan had built. The dead man's switch was just the detonator. The real explosive was buried in the FDA and international partner agreements. Each phase of Project Chimera's approval was contingent on maintaining the designated key scientific personnel for the synaptic lock protocol. I had made sure my name, my credentials, my very identity were woven into the definition of that role, buried in appendices and cross-referenced across hundreds of pages of legal and scientific documents where Donovan would never look. My encrypted laptop chimed. A message from Leo. Internal network is a firestorm. Compliance is in full panic mode. They don't know what triggered the system-wide alert. He's about to find out, I typed back. The Ohio files. Are they ready? Ready for transfer on your command. I watched the clock on my dashboard. 10:10 a.m., the 10-minute grace period I had built into the system, the time it took to verify a termination wasn't an error, was over. My phone buzzed. An automated email notification from the system I'd built, blind copied to my personal address. A formal alert had just been sent to the FDA's regulatory oversight portal and the chief compliance officers of all 7 partner corporations. Subject: Critical Integrity Failure Event DETCTD. Project Chimera Data PLACED in Provisional Quarantine. The first domino had fallen. In the Helix conference room 20 floors above me, Donovan would be watching his $5 billion victory speech turn to ash in his mouth. The investors would be looking at their tablets, seeing the same terrifying notification. Their own legal teams, trained to see risk the way sharks smell blood, would be frantically cross-referencing contracts, looking for the clauses I had so carefully planted. Dr. Alastair Finch would be the first to connect the dots. He was a scientist before he was an investor. He respected the process. He would see the crimson key around my neck in his mind's eye and understand. The silence in the Atoria Heights conference room was absolute. The kind of silence that precedes earthquakes, that hangs in the air before a jury delivers a verdict, that stretches between the lightning and the thunder. Through my laptop's monitoring system, I could see the internal Novra communications exploding with panic. But in that room, nobody moved. Then Dr. Alastair Finch stood up. The sound of his chair sliding back against the marble floor echoed like a gunshot. Every eye in the room turned to him. Mr. Price, Alastair's voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who had weathered enough storms to recognize when a ship was about to sink. Before we proceed, I require clarification. Donovan's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Of course, Alastair. Transparency is the cornerstone of our partnership. An interesting choice of words. Alastair picked up his tablet, displaying the project charter. You just terminated your chief molecular architect. The scientist whose name, let me see, he scrolled with practiced efficiency, appears 87 times in the core patent filings for the synaptic lock protocol. The individual designated as the sole key scientific personnel in the FDA submission documents. As I mentioned, we are streamlining for, if she goes, we go. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Donovan's smile froze, became brittle, started to crack at the edges. I'm sorry. Alastair tapped his tablet, and a document appeared on the main holographic display for everyone to see. It was titled Dynamic Validation Clause, subsection 12.5. Our consortium is hereby withdrawing from this agreement, effective immediately. As per this clause, evidence of a compromise of core scientific integrity provides all parties with the right to exit without penalty within the initial funding window. Firing the architect of the entire protocol, moments before final authorization, constitutes such a compromise. Donovan actually laughed. A sharp, ugly sound. Don't be absurd, Alastair. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar project. Your board will have your head. My board, Alastair said quietly, trusts my judgment. And my judgment is that any company that fires its chief scientist in the middle of a $5 billion authorization has something critically wrong to hide. She was redundant. She was the foundation of this entire project. Alastair's composure finally broke, his voice resonating with genuine, scientific anger. "Do you think we are fools, Donovan? Do you think we don't do our due diligence? Dr. Emerald Watts is the only reason Kalen Biogenetics survived the federal inquiry into the Icarus project. She is the one whose name the FDA regulators trust. She is the science." The other executives were shifting, whispering to their aides, their own tablets now glowing with urgent messages from their legal teams. The Tokyo representative, Kenji Tanaka, was already packing his briefcase. "This is preposterous," Donovan said, but beads of sweat were forming on his forehead. "One person does not make or break a deal of this magnitude." Alastair gestured to the screen. "According to the documents you yourself provided, she does." He looked around the table. "I suggest you all read subsection 12.5 very carefully. You have a very short window to decide if you want to be tethered to a company that just deliberately severed its own brain." He walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Donovan, you might want to check the status of your FDA submission. I believe its validity is contingent on the continuous oversight of your key scientific personnel. The clock is ticking." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a coffin nail being driven home. The dominoes fell with mathematical precision. Through my laptop, I watched the cascade in real time. 10:12 a.m. Tokyo's Kenji Tanaka stood, bowed formally to the remaining partners, and left without a word. His legal team was already filing the withdrawal notice. 10:15, the Zurich contingent conferred in rapid German. Their lead negotiator shook his head. "The risk is now incalculable. We withdraw." 10:17, Berlin, then Paris. The careful choreography of a world-changing deal had devolved into a mass exodus. "Wait," Donovan's voice cracked. "This is about one employee, a replaceable employee, replaceable?" Alastair's voice echoed in the now half-empty room as he had paused at the doorway, holding it open. "Then replace her. Right now. Tell us who understands the stabilization data for the last 6 months. Who has the authority to unlock the quarantine data? Who knows why Appendix C references a specific mitochondrial RNA sequence from a 2017 study?" Donovan's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Behind him, his assistant was frantically typing on her phone, a desperate search for an answer that didn't exist. "That's what I thought," Alastair said, and then he was gone. The conference table, which minutes ago held the promise of saving millions of lives and generating billions in revenue, now looked like a battlefield after a massacre. Abandoned tablets and unsigned digital contracts littered its surface. My phone buzzed. It was Leo. "FDA just sent an official inquiry. They've put a full administrative hold on the Chimera project. The beautiful part was I hadn't done anything illegal. I had simply built the system to protect the science from a corrupt leader. When Donovan fired me, he didn't just fire a person. He triggered a dozen automated, systemic, and contractual consequences. It was like pulling the wrong block in a game of Jenga. The entire tower was designed to fall. My phone rang again, Donovan's personal cell. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. On the 4th try, I answered, putting it on speaker. "You did this." His voice was a raw, strangled whisper. "You sabotaged everything." "I built everything, Donovan," I said calmly. "Every protocol, every safeguard, every system that kept your incompetence from killing this company. All I did was stop maintaining it. The FDA submission is contingent on qualified scientific oversight. You should have read the documents before you signed them. This is illegal. This is corporate espionage. I'll sue you into oblivion. On what grounds? I have documented every corner you cut, every safety protocol you ignored, every warning I gave you. It's all in the files, including the Icarus project, including the original, flawed data that would have put lives at risk." Silence. Then quieter, desperate. "The partners, they're all gone. The dynamic validation clause worked exactly as written," I said. "You gave them the perfect reason to use it. $5 billion. Plus the federal fines you're about to incur for data misrepresentation. Plus the shareholder lawsuits. Plus the criminal investigation into the Icarus project that I can no longer prevent. I am the industry," I thought, echoing the words of a story I once heard. But I said something else. "Donovan, you sell stories, I create reality. And in this world, reality always wins." I hung up the phone. On my laptop screen, a new notification popped up. "Urgent, all-hands executive meeting. Boardroom A mandatory attendance." It was starting, the final act. I sent one last text to Leo. "The Ohio files. Send them." His reply was instantaneous. "Sent. To the Department of Justice whistleblower portal." I watched as the empire I had built, and then built safeguards to demolish, began to devour its king. The board meeting was a bloodbath. Through the encrypted backdoor Leo had given me, I had a live audio feed. It was a symphony of destruction, and I was its invisible conductor. Chairman Douglas Reed, a man whose composure was as legendary as his fortune, slammed his fist on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Explain to me, Donovan, how 20 years of groundbreaking science just evaporated in under 30 minutes. Donovan, his voice trembling, tried to spin it. It's a temporary setback, a negotiation tactic by Alistair. We can get them back. With what credibility? The CFO, Patricia Chen, shot back, her voice laced with ice. The FDA has put an administrative hold on our single most valuable asset. The SEC has halted trading of our stock. We are, for all intents and purposes, dead in the water. The general counsel, Robert Sterling, sounded like he was about to be sick. It's worse. Our D&O insurance carrier just sent notice. They're voiding our policy due to a material misrepresentation of risk. Donovan, did you sign the last renewal using your personal assets as collateral? The color drained from Donovan's face. I could hear it in his silence. That was a temporary measure, he finally stammered. Just until the funding closed. The funding that just collapsed, Reed thundered. The funding you destroyed by firing the one person whose integrity was holding this entire enterprise together. She was expendable. Expendable? Patricia's voice was sharp, cutting. Dr. Watts's protocols have saved this company an estimated $300 million in potential regulatory fines over the last 5 years alone. Her synaptic lock protocol is the only reason we have a $5 billion project to begin with. She isn't a component, Donovan. She is the entire operating system. Through my laptop, I pulled up a copy of Donovan's executive employment contract. Section 12, paragraph 4. Personal liability for acts of gross negligence resulting in catastrophic material damage to the company. His lawyers had been so focused on his golden parachute, they'd missed the trapdoor I'd advised Robert to include years ago. Robert Sterling's phone buzzed. I could hear the notification. He cleared his throat. I have just received an alert from our legal contacts in Washington. The Department of Justice has opened a formal investigation into the Icarus project. They received a comprehensive whistleblower packet this morning. It seems to contain original, time-stamped data showing you personally ordered the bypass of critical safety protocols. That's impossible, Donovan choked out. The only person who had that data, he stopped, the dawning horror evident in his silence. The one person who protected you, Reed said, his voice a low growl. The one you just publicly humiliated. Another board member, a woman who had always been Donovan's staunchest supporter, spoke up. I'm looking at the system architecture documents now. Donovan, did you know that the entire compliance system was designed with an ethical failsafe that required her personal cryptographic key? The whole system was built to prevent exactly this. A catastrophic failure triggered by the removal of its core architect. That's sabotage, Donovan shrieked. That, Patricia countered, is goddamn brilliant. She built herself into the very foundation, and you took a sledgehammer to it without checking the blueprints. Through the feed, I heard the boardroom doors open. Federal investigators were in the building, with warrants. The Icarus files, the EPA violations, every dirty secret I had been forced to clean up and bury for 20 years were now unearthed. Your estate in La Jolla, Reed said, his voice flat and dead. Your art collection, your offshore accounts. You leveraged them all for the company's bond, didn't you? To secure the last round of financing. The lawyer said it was standard, Donovan whispered. Standard if the deal closes. It didn't. And now the company is facing billions in liabilities with no insurance, and your personal assets are the only thing left on the table. Patricia Chen made the motion. To remove Donovan Price as CEO, effective immediately for gross negligence. It was seconded by 3 voices at once, all in favor. 12 hands went up. Unanimous. You can't do this, he screamed. I built this company. No, Reed said, his voice filled with a final, damning clarity. Dr. Watts built this company. You were just the person who took credit for it. The same 2 security guards who had escorted me out an hour earlier entered the boardroom. There was a grim poetry in that. Mr. Price, Mike said, his voice formal, the U.S. Marshals are here to see you. As Donovan was led away, his world collapsing around him, I watched him enter the same elevator that had marked my descent into freedom. He was leaving in handcuffs, headed for a federal indictment. The empire hadn't just burned, it had been deconstructed with surgical precision. And Donovan, who had built nothing, was left standing in the ashes of his own hubris, finally understanding that the architect he dismissed was the only thing that had ever been real. I stepped out of the parking garage into the brilliant California sunshine, the weight of 20 years finally, miraculously, gone. The city looked sharper, the ocean bluer. My phone was buzzing incessantly, but for the first time in my adult life, I felt no compulsion to answer it. The crimson key, my insurance policy, my weapon, felt heavy around my neck. It had served its purpose. I walked to the edge of a nearby pier, the sea breeze cool on my face. I took the key off, held it in my palm for a moment, and then tossed it into the Pacific. It vanished into the waves without a splash. My power was never in that key. It was in my mind. My phone rang. An international number. Dr. Finch. Emerald, he said, his voice warm. I hope this isn't too soon, but my consortium and I have just concluded an emergency meeting. We've been discussing the formation of a new independent research institute. Properly funded, ethically managed, with science as its only objective. We need a director, someone who builds things to last. I stood on the pier, watching the tide come in. The position comes with complete autonomy, he continued. A blank check. You would answer to no one but the science. We were never investing in Kaelin, Emerald. We were investing in you. We were just waiting for you to become available. I need some time to think, I said. Of course. But don't take too long. I've already heard from Tokyo and Zurich. You're about to become the most sought-after mind in biotechnology. After he hung up, I sat on a bench, watching the waves roll in. 20 years of 16-hour days, missed birthdays, and postponed dreams, all in service of a man who saw me as a tool. My phone buzzed, a text from my daughter. Mom, I saw the news, I'm so proud of you. Another buzz, Leo, the board wants to know if you'd consider coming back as CEO, to save the company. I almost laughed out loud. They wanted me to rebuild the very thing I had just allowed to crumble, to save them from their own willful blindness. I typed back a single word. No. No explanation, no negotiation, just no. The final message came an hour later, an automated alert from the Kaelin system which I was still copied on. Case ID, 9A4 Chimera. Status, closed, resolution, systemic structural failure. Estimated recovery time, indefinite. My name would forever be linked to this day, not as the woman who was fired, but as the architect whose absence was catastrophic. In business schools, they would study the Watts effect. In boardrooms, CEOs would ask their top talent, are you essential or are you a Watts? I stood from the bench and pulled up my daughter's number. But before I called, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I turned my phone completely off. The world, with its job offers and its vindication, could wait. I walked along the shoreline, remembering the young scientist I had been, so full of trust and ambition. She had been naive, but she had been right about one thing. Building something that matters is everything. Because when you build the foundation, you also hold the power to let it fall. The sun was warm on my face. Behind me, an empire was in ruins. Ahead of me was a future where my name would be on the door. I finally called my daughter. Want to get dinner tonight? I asked. For the first time in 20 years, I'm completely free. The architect had left the building, and as everyone could now see, the building could not stand without her.